started with a locked door. I had come home early that Friday, around 5:30 p.m. Jessica, my wife, had been working from home for the past year, doing some marketing job she picked up after deciding she was too bored to just be a mom. Normally, I'd walk into the house to the sound of her talking on the phone or clicking away at her laptop in the kitchen. But that day, silence greeted me. I remember standing there in the foyer, holding a box of cupcakes I'd picked up as a surprise for the kids. It was a small gesture, something to make the weekend feel special. I called out her name. "Jess? You here?" No answer. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the house was holding its breath. I headed upstairs, figuring maybe she was taking a nap or on a call. But as I climbed the steps, I noticed something strange. The door to our bedroom was shut. That's not unusual, you might think. But let me tell you, in 12 years of marriage, we never closed that door unless one of us was changing or sick. It was just one of those unspoken habits. And here it was shut. Not just shut, but locked. I knocked. "Jess." I waited. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. "Jessica? Everything okay in there?" A beat of silence. Then, a muffled voice. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just finishing something up." "Be down in a minute." Finishing something? What could she possibly be finishing in our locked bedroom at 5:30 in the evening? My heart started pounding, though I didn't know why. I tried to play it off, joking. "What are you, hiding Christmas presents or something?" Her laugh came too quickly, too high-pitched. "Yeah, exactly. Just, don't come in, okay?" She didn't even try to make it sound convincing. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door. My gut twisted in a way I couldn't explain. Something was happening behind that door. Something she didn't want me to see. And then I heard it. A faint rustling sound, like fabric brushing against fabric. And a whisper, low, hurried, and absolutely not hers. My stomach dropped. "Jess," I said, my voice tightening. "Who's in there with you?" She didn't answer right away. I heard more movement, a scuffle maybe, like someone was scrambling to get up. My mind raced, jumping to every possible conclusion, each worse than the last. "Jess," I shouted, banging on the door. "Open the damn door right now." "I said I'll be down in a minute, Eric," she snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. I didn't care anymore. I grabbed the handle and yanked, but of course it didn't budge. Without thinking, I threw my weight against the door, slamming into it with my shoulder. Took 2 tries before the lock gave way, the door flying open with a loud crack. What I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. Jessica was standing by the bed, her face pale as a ghost, her hands gripping the edge of the mattress like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And next to her, half hidden behind the open closet door, was a man. Mid-30s, maybe a little younger than me, wearing nothing but boxer briefs. His shirt was crumpled on the floor. I stared at him, then at her. My brain struggled to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. "What the hell is this?" I finally managed to say, my voice low and shaking. Jessica opened her mouth, then closed it, like a fish gasping for air. She didn't look guilty. She didn't even look ashamed. She just looked annoyed, like I was inconveniencing her. "Eric," she said, sighing as if I were the one overreacting. "You weren't supposed to be home yet." That one sentence hit me harder than a punch to the gut. Not, "This isn't what it looks like," or "I can explain." Just, "You weren't supposed to be home yet." The guy, whoever he was, started fumbling for his jeans on the floor. Look, man, I should probably go." "You think?" I snapped, taking a step toward him. He flinched, grabbing his clothes and backing toward the door like a scared rabbit. I was seconds away from decking him, but he bolted before I could do anything. And then it was just me and Jessica, standing in the wreckage of whatever the hell our marriage used to be. "What the F*** is wrong with you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "How long has this been going on?" She crossed her arms, still not meeting my eyes. "Does it matter?" Her words hit me like a slap. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No apology, no remorse. Just pure, cold indifference. "Does it matter? Are you serious right now?" I shouted. "We have a family, Jess. We have 2 kids. And this is what you're doing while I'm at work." She rolled her eyes, like I was being dramatic. "Oh, don't give me that family crap. You're never around, Eric. You work late, you barely talk to me anymore, and honestly, you're boring. I needed more. Her words sliced through me like knives. Boring? I was working my ass off to provide for her, for our kids, for this life we built together, and I'm boring? I stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved for 15 years, and realized she wasn't that woman anymore. Or maybe she never was. That's when I made my decision. I didn't say another word. I turned around, walked out of the room, and headed straight to the kids' bedrooms. I told Max and Lila to pack a bag. We were going on an adventure. Jessica didn't try to stop me. She didn't even come downstairs. When she came home happy from her little date with her lover later that night, the kids and I were already gone. And that was just the beginning. The drive to the motel was the longest 30 minutes of my life. Max sat in the back seat with Lila, both of them chatting away, blissfully unaware of the storm I was trying to contain in my chest. Every mile I put between us and that house felt like another step toward breaking apart the life I thought I was holding together. Lila, clutching her favorite stuffed unicorn, leaned forward and asked, "Daddy, where's Mommy? Isn't she coming with us?" For a second, I couldn't breathe. How the hell do you answer a question like that to a 6-year-old? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Mommy had to stay home, sweetie. This is just a special trip for us." Max, always more observant than his sister, narrowed his eyes. "Is Mommy mad at you? Did you guys have a fight?" His question hit me harder than I expected. This kid, my kid, was already so used to tiptoeing around tension. I wanted to scream, to tell him how unfair it was that he even had to ask that question. But instead, I forced a smile in the rearview mirror. "No, buddy. Everything's fine. Just sit back and enjoy the ride." Okay. When we pulled into the parking lot of the rundown motel just outside of town, Max wrinkled his nose. "This doesn't look like a fun trip," he muttered under his breath. I didn't respond. I parked the car, got out, and checked us into a room with 2 beds. The receptionist didn't ask questions, but the way she looked at me, like she knew exactly what kind of night I was having, made my skin crawl. Once we were inside the room, the kids immediately claimed the bed closest to the TV and started arguing over what channel to watch. I sat on the other bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, trying to make sense of the whirlwind my life had become in the last few hours. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was her. "Jessica. Where are you?" "Jessica. Eric, this isn't funny. Bring the kids home." "Jessica. Answer me. We need to talk." Talk? Now she wanted to talk? I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the block button. But blocking her wouldn't fix anything. I had to think. I had to figure out my next move. I didn't reply. An hour later, the texts turned into calls. I let them go to voicemail. After the 5th missed call, she left a message. "Eric, stop being dramatic. Bring the kids home. I don't have time for this." No apology. No concern for the kids. Just annoyance that I disrupted her evening. I could almost picture her pacing in the living room, scrolling through her phone, probably messaging that guy to vent about how difficult I was being. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall. Instead, I shoved it into my pocket and turned to Max and Lila. "All right, guys," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "Who's up for pizza?" That perked them up instantly. I ordered delivery from the first place I could find, and while we waited, I helped Max set up his Nintendo Switch on the motel TV. Lila climbed onto my lap, babbling about how she was going to beat her brother at Mario Kart. For a moment, I almost felt normal. Almost. The pizza came, and we ate sitting on the beds, the kids giggling over cheesy jokes they made up on the spot. I laughed along with them, even though my mind was miles away. I kept checking the window, half expecting Jessica to show up. I wasn't sure what I'd do if she did. After the kids finally fell asleep, I sat in the dark, staring at my phone. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. This wasn't just about Jessica cheating anymore. This was about what kind of life I wanted for my kids, for myself. I started scrolling through my photos, pictures of family vacations, birthdays, lazy Sunday mornings on the couch. In every single one, Jessica was smiling, playing the part of the perfect wife and mother. And for the first time, I wondered how much of it was real. At 11 p.m., Another text came through. Jessica, you don't have the right to take them like this. Bring them back now or I'll call the police. I laughed out loud. A bitter, hollow sound. The police? For what? For protecting my kids from whatever circus she was running back at the house? Let her call. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Still, I knew I couldn't stay holed up in that motel forever. She'd figure out where we were eventually, and I wasn't about to have that confrontation in front of Max and Lila. I needed to buy myself some time to figure out how to make this separation permanent. So I texted her back, keeping it short and cold. Me, the kids are safe. I'll call you when I'm ready. Her reply came almost instantly. Jessica, you're overreacting. Don't do something you'll regret. Regret? Oh, I regretted plenty, like ignoring the signs for so long, like trusting her, like letting her turn me into some predictable, dependable idiot while she snuck around behind my back. But if she thought I'd regret taking my kids and walking out, she had no idea who she was dealing with. I stared at the ceiling for hours that night, my mind racing. By morning, I had a plan. The game wasn't over. It was just getting started. When I woke up the next morning, the kids were still asleep, their small bodies tangled together under the scratchy motel blanket. For a moment, I just sat there, watching them breathe. They didn't know it yet, but their lives were about to change. I couldn't let them grow up in a house built on lies. And I couldn't let Jessica think she could just waltz back into our lives after what she'd done. I wasn't going to play the victim. Not anymore. I slipped into the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I looked like hell. But there was something else there, too. Something I hadn't felt in years. Focus. Jessica thought she was smart, but she'd made a mistake. 2 mistakes, actually. The first was thinking I'd just roll over and take this. The second? Underestimating how far I'd go to protect what mattered to me. By the time the kids woke up, I had already booked us into a cabin about 2 hours away. It wasn't much, just a little rental on the edge of a lake, but it was far enough to buy me the breathing room I needed. I told Max and Lila we were going on a mini vacation. They were too excited about the lake to ask questions. Jessica, of course, was another story. As we packed up the car, my phone buzzed nonstop. Calls, texts, voicemails. She was relentless. I ignored every single one. But as I was loading the last of the bags, my phone vibrated again. I glanced down and froze. It wasn't Jessica this time. It was Kelly, her best friend. Kelly, Eric, what's going on? Jess is freaking out. Can we talk? For a second, I considered ignoring her, too. But then an idea sparked, and I realized Kelly might be exactly the person I needed to hear from. I shot her a quick reply. Me, sure. Call me in 20 minutes. We hit the road not long after. The kids were chattering in the back seat, arguing over who would get the biggest pancake when we stopped for breakfast. Meanwhile, my mind was spinning, calculating my next move. True to her word, Kelly called about 20 minutes later. I turned down the radio, made sure the kids were occupied, and picked up. Eric. Kelly's voice was cautious, almost hesitant. Hey, Kelly, I said, keeping my tone even. Jessica sent you, didn't she? She didn't send me, Kelly replied, sounding defensive. She's just worried. She said you took the kids without telling her. Is that true? I almost laughed. Did she also tell you why? There was a pause on the other end. No, Kelly admitted. She just said you were upset. And look, I'm not trying to pick sides here. I just want to make sure you're okay. I'm fine. The kids are fine. But since you're so concerned, let me fill you in. I laid it all out for her. The locked door, the guy in his underwear, the complete lack of remorse from Jessica. By the time I finished, Kelly was dead silent. You're kidding, she finally said. But her voice didn't sound surprised. You knew, didn't you? I pressed, my heart pounding. What? No. I suspected something was going on, but Jess never told me anything directly. I swear. I didn't know if she was lying or not, but at that moment I didn't care. Look, Kelly, I'm not calling you to point fingers. I need to know if there's anything else. Has she said anything to you? Mentioned anyone? I need the truth. There was another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear Kelly weighing her loyalty to Jessica against whatever shred of decency she had left. "There's a guy," she finally admitted. "I don't know his name, but she's mentioned him a couple of times. She said he was exciting and made her feel alive." Kelly's voice dropped to a whisper. "Eric, I didn't know it had gone this far. I thought she was just venting." "Venting," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "She locked me out of my own bedroom, Kelly. She brought him into my house. Does that sound like venting to you?" Kelly didn't respond, which was answer enough. "Thanks for your honesty," I said, my voice cold. "Tell Jessica I'll be in touch when I'm ready." And then I hung up. That was all I needed to hear. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't just some fling. He was the excuse Jessica had been waiting for. The ticket out of a life she'd apparently decided wasn't good enough for her anymore. But she had underestimated me. That night, after we settled into the cabin and the kids were asleep, I sat at the small kitchen table with a beer and my laptop. It didn't take long to piece together a plan. The first step was finding the guy. If Jessica wouldn't give me answers, I'd get them myself. And when I found him, let's just say I wasn't going to handle it the way she thought I would. Revenge wasn't about yelling, breaking things, or making a scene. It was about precision, about making sure she realized, with crystal clarity, that she'd destroyed the wrong man. She wanted excitement? She wanted freedom? Fine. I'd give her a taste of both, and see how she liked living with the fallout. Finding him was easier than I thought. People like Jessica don't cover their tracks as well as they think. When someone lives a double life, they always leave breadcrumbs, and she wasn't exactly subtle. It started with her email. I'd set up Jessica's Gmail account years ago, back when she needed help getting organized. What she didn't know was that I'd linked it to an old backup email of mine. I never had a reason to use it until now. Logging in was like stepping into a room she'd forgotten to lock. I wasn't prepared for how much was there. Flirty messages, vague innuendos, even a reservation for a hotel that she had conveniently claimed was for a networking event. It didn't take long to find his name, Ryan Carter. Ryan. It sounded generic enough to belong to a guy who thought he was special because he wore leather jackets and posted gym selfies on Instagram. The emails painted a nauseating picture. Inside jokes, pet names, plans to meet while I was at work. She'd even forwarded him a few pictures of the kids. My kids. That was the part that made my blood boil. She'd brought this guy into our world, let him peek into the life we'd built, all while keeping me in the dark. She had turned what was supposed to be sacred into some kind of joke. It took all my self-control to keep from smashing the laptop. But I couldn't lose my cool. Not now. I needed more information, and for that I had to keep digging. I searched his name on social media, and there he was, the human embodiment of every midlife crisis cliché you could imagine. His profile was public, and it didn't take long to find the telltale signs. Pictures of him hiking, shirtless selfies with captions like, "Rise and grind," and, of course, a motorcycle. He looked younger than me by a few years, closer to Jessica's age. Fit, cocky, and exactly the kind of idiot who thought breaking up a family made him irresistible. Scrolling through his posts, I noticed something else: locations. He wasn't just some random fling. He lived nearby, less than 30 minutes from my house. In fact, that's when it all clicked. The networking events, the girls' nights, the gym obsession. All of it had been orchestrated so she could spend time with him. She didn't just cheat. She turned our life into her playground. I stayed up late into the night, piecing together his patterns, his habits. He worked as a personal trainer, which explained the obsession with fitness. His posts showed him hanging out at the same coffee shop every Friday morning. He liked to hit up a local bar on Saturday nights, usually with a group of equally douchey-looking friends. By the time the sun started to rise, I had everything I needed. But I didn't just want to confront him. That would be too simple. I wanted to unravel his little fantasy life. Jessica might have thought he was some kind of escape, but I was about to show her exactly what she'd traded me for. I spent the next day with the kids, trying to focus on them instead of the storm brewing inside me. Max and Lila didn't need to know what was going on. Not yet. They thought we were just on a little trip, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. By the time evening rolled around, I had finalized my plan. I left the kids with a babysitter, an older woman who ran the cabin rentals and was happy to help for a small fee. Then I drove into town, parking a few blocks away from Ryan's favorite bar. The place was loud, crowded, and reeked of cheap beer. It wasn't hard to spot him. He was standing near the pool table, surrounded by a few guys who looked like carbon copies of him. Muscles, tight shirts, cocky grins. Ryan had his arm draped around a woman who wasn't Jessica. Interesting. I grabbed a drink and found a spot near the wall where I could watch without being noticed. The woman he was flirting with couldn't have been more than 25, and she was laughing at every stupid thing he said. He leaned in close, whispering something in her ear that made her giggle. So this was the guy Jessica had decided was worth blowing up her life for. A serial flirt who probably thought commitment was a dirty word. I waited until he went to the bar to grab another drink. Then I made my move. "Ryan Carter?" I said, stepping up beside him. He turned, clearly surprised. "Yeah? Who's asking?" For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, really looked at him. He had that smug, self-satisfied air about him, the kind that only comes from coasting through life on looks and charm. It made me sick. "My name's Eric," I said finally. "We have a mutual friend." He frowned, confused. "I don't think I know you, man." "You don't?" I said, my voice calm. "But you know my wife, Jessica." The color drained from his face so fast it was almost comical. "Oh, relax," I said, holding up a hand. "I'm not here to fight you." That seemed to confuse him even more. He glanced around, probably looking for backup, but his friends were too busy with their beers and pool game to notice. "I just wanted to meet the guy who's been sneaking around with her," I continued, keeping my tone casual. "I mean, it's not every day you get to shake hands with the guy who wrecked your marriage." "Look, man, Save it," I interrupted. "I already know everything. The emails, the meetups, the hotel reservations. I'm not here to make a scene. I just want to know one thing." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "What? Does she know?" I asked, tilting my head. "Does she know what?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Does she know about the other women? Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look like she's the only one you've been keeping busy with." He stiffened, his eyes darting toward the girl he'd been flirting with. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he cleared his throat. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." I smiled coldly. "Enjoy your night, Ryan. And don't worry. I'll make sure Jessica gets the full story." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, pale and flustered. Step 1. Plant the seed. Let him panic. Let him wonder if Jessica was about to find out the truth about him. Step 2. That would come soon enough. The next morning, I sat at the edge of the dock behind the cabin, watching the mist roll off the lake. The kids were inside, eating cereal and watching cartoons, their laughter echoing faintly through the cabin walls. It was peaceful out here, serene, a stark contrast to the storm building inside me. Jessica had texted me twice that morning. "Jessica, are you ready to stop this nonsense yet? Jessica, we need to talk about the kids. Stop dragging this out." Not a single word about what she had done. No apology. No admission of guilt. Just pure arrogance, like I was the unreasonable one for not playing along with her charade. She didn't know I had met Ryan. She didn't know what I knew, or what I was planning. I pulled out my phone and typed a message, keeping it short and deliberate. "Me, let's talk." Her reply came immediately. "Jessica, finally. Where?" "Me, at the house. Be there at noon. Alone." The word alone was important. I wasn't about to let her drag Ryan into this. This was between me and her. By 11:30, I had dropped the kids off with the same babysitter and was driving toward the house. The roads were familiar, but everything about that drive felt different. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was the scene of a crime. Her crime. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. She was sitting on the front steps, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. As I got out of the car, she looked up and gave me a tight, annoyed smile. "About time," she said, standing and crossing her arms. "I've been waiting." I ignored her and walked past her, unlocking the front door. She followed me inside, the sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. "So, Are you done playing the victim? Or are we going to have an actual conversation? She asked, her tone sharp. I turned to face her, leaning against the kitchen counter. We'll have a conversation. But first, I want to hear you say it. She frowned. Say what? Say what you did. Jessica rolled her eyes, like I just asked her to recite the alphabet. Eric, don't be ridiculous. We both know why we're here. I don't need to spell it out for you. I felt my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. No, I said, my voice low and steady. You do need to spell it out. I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you admit it. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, she let out a bitter laugh. Fine, she said, throwing up her hands. You want me to say it? I cheated on you. There. Happy now. Happy? The word echoed in my mind like a bad joke. No, I said, shaking my head. But at least now you've said it. Jessica leaned against the table, her arms crossed. Eric, don't act like this is all on me. Our marriage has been dead for years. You're always working, always distracted. You've been checked out for ages. What did you expect me to do? Sit around and wait for you to notice me? Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't let it show. So this is my fault? It's not about fault, she snapped. It's about reality. You stopped trying, Eric. You stopped being exciting. I needed more and Ryan. I interrupted, raising an eyebrow. You mean the guy who was hitting on another woman at the bar last night? That shut her up. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Yeah. I continued, my voice cold. I met him. Nice guy, really. Seemed busy, though. Too busy to bother mentioning that he's been sleeping with half the women in town. Apparently. Jessica's face flushed. That's not true. Isn't it? I said, taking a step closer. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you blew up our family for a guy who doesn't even take you seriously. She looked away, her jaw tightening. For the first time, I saw something other than arrogance in her expression. Doubt. I didn't come here to fight, I said, backing off slightly. I came here to tell you what's going to happen next. Her head snapped back toward me, her eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done playing games, I said firmly. I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. And I'm going to make damn sure the kids stay with me. She let out a sharp laugh, but it was forced. You think you can just take them from me? Good luck with that, Eric. No court is going to side with you over their mother. I pulled out my phone and opened an app I downloaded the night before. You sure about that? I asked, holding it up. Her eyes flicked to the screen, and for the first time, I saw a real panic flash across her face. What is that? She demanded. Proof, I said simply. Of everything. The texts, the emails, the hotel reservations. Even the video I got last night of Ryan flirting with that girl at the bar. And trust me, Jessica, the courts will be very interested to see how dedicated you've been to this family. Her face turned white. You wouldn't. Try me. For a moment, the room was dead silent. Jessica stared at me, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Then, she did something I didn't expect. She laughed. Not the bitter, annoyed laugh from earlier. This one was darker, more dangerous. Fine, she said, her voice icy. You want to play dirty? Let's play dirty. But don't think for a second that I'm going to let you take my kids away from me. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I stared her down, my expression unflinching. They're not your kids, I said quietly. They're ours, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect them from you. Jessica didn't respond. She just grabbed her bag, stormed out the door, and slammed it behind her. As I stood there in the empty kitchen, the adrenaline finally started to fade, leaving me with nothing but exhaustion. The fight wasn't over, far from it. But for the first time, I felt like I was on the front foot. She wanted a war? She just declared it. And I wasn't planning to lose. The moment Jessica slammed the door, I exhaled the breath I didn't realize I was holding. The silence in the house felt heavy, almost suffocating. I wanted to feel victorious, like I had just claimed the upper hand in some grand battle. But the truth was, my hands were shaking, and my stomach was in knots. This wasn't a fight I wanted. But it was a fight I had no choice but to win. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the screen of my phone. The evidence I'd gathered was all neatly stored in a folder. Texts, emails, screenshots of her messages with Ryan, and the video of him cozying up to that girl at the bar. It was a damning collection, one I'd show to my lawyer first thing Monday morning. But there was something else I needed to do. Something that wasn't about legal strategies or custody battles. This wasn't just about the kids anymore. It was about reclaiming my life from the wreckage Jessica had created. I opened Facebook. I hadn't posted in years, social media wasn't really my thing. But this was too perfect an opportunity. I scrolled through my photos until I found a picture of Jessica and me from 2 years ago. It was one of those perfect couple shots, taken at a friend's wedding. She was laughing, her arm draped around my shoulders. We looked happy. We looked real. I added a caption, "Funny how a photo can lie. Behind the smiles are years of deceit. Behind the laughter, betrayal. Behind her hand on my shoulder, a knife perfectly aimed. But don't worry, the truth always comes out." I hit post before I could second-guess myself. I wasn't usually one for public drama, but this wasn't about airing my dirty laundry. This was about setting the stage. Jessica had spent years carefully curating the image of a perfect wife and mother. I wanted her to know that I wasn't afraid to tear that facade down. Within minutes, the comments started pouring in. Friends, coworkers, even some of Jessica's family chimed in. Most were shocked, some were supportive, and a few were downright nosy, fishing for details. I didn't reply to any of them. That wasn't the point. By the time I put my phone down, my head was pounding. I hadn't slept much in days, and the weight of everything was starting to catch up with me. I needed to clear my head. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, letting the crisp autumn air wash over me. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of suburban silence that used to feel comforting but now felt eerie, like it was mocking me. I didn't get far before my phone buzzed again. It was Kelly. For a moment, I debated letting it go to voicemail. But then I remembered the way her voice had cracked during our last conversation. The hesitation, the guilt. She might not have been innocent in all. "Eric," she said when I answered, her voice low. "What the hell is going on? Jessica just called me and she's losing it. She said you're trying to ruin her life." "Ruin her life?" I said, my voice cold. "She ruined it herself. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." Kelly sighed. "Look, I get it. What she did was awful, and you have every right to be angry. But airing it out on social media? That's not going to help anyone, especially not the kids." Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. "Don't lecture me, Kelly. You knew. Maybe not everything, but you knew enough. And you said nothing. So don't pretend to care about the kids now." There was a long pause on the other end. When Kelly finally spoke, her voice was softer. "You're right. I should have said something. I didn't know how. Jessica's always been intense. And honestly, I didn't think she'd go this far." "She didn't just go far," I said bitterly. "She burned it all to the ground." "I'm sorry, Eric. I really am." She hesitated. "But you need to be careful. Jessica's not going to take this lying down. You know how she is. She doesn't lose, not without a fight." I smirked, though there was no humor in it. "Good. Let her fight. I'm ready." Kelly didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her tone was more serious. "Just don't let this consume you, okay? The kids need you. Don't lose sight of that." The call ended shortly after, but her words lingered in my mind. The kids, Max and Lila, were my priority, that much was clear. But what Kelly didn't understand was that this fight was for them. For their safety, their future. For the life they deserved. As I walked back into the house, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Jessica. "Jessica, you want to play dirty? Fine. But don't forget, Eric, I know things about you too. You're not as perfect as you like to pretend. Let's see how everyone reacts when I start telling my side of the story." A part of me wanted to laugh. Of course, she tried to turn this into a war of perception, twisting the narrative to make herself look like the victim. But unlike her, I didn't have skeletons in my closet. My biggest crime was trusting her. I typed a quick reply. "Me. Tell whoever you want. But remember this. I'm not the one who cheated. I'm not the one who lied. And I'm not the one who brought a stranger into our kids' lives. Keep digging that hole, Jessica. I'll be waiting at the bottom. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the counter. This wasn't just about me and Jessica anymore. It was about control, control over the truth, control over the narrative, control over the future. And I was done letting her call the shots. As I stood there in the kitchen, I realized something. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Jessica wanted a fight, she'd get one. But I wasn't just fighting for revenge. I was fighting to take my life back. Jessica's threat didn't scare me. Pissed me off. The idea that she thought she could twist the truth, that she could paint me as the bad guy after what she'd done, was almost laughable. Almost. The thing about Jessica is that she's never faced real consequences. She's always had a way of talking herself out of trouble, spinning stories to make herself look like the victim. In high school, she convinced her teacher that her dog actually did eat her homework. In college, she talked her way out of a speeding ticket by crying about a fake family emergency. And with me, she was the queen of deflecting blame. But this time, I wasn't letting her get away with it. The next morning, I met with my lawyer. His name was Dan. A no-nonsense type with a receding hairline and the kind of steel gaze that could make anyone squirm. He came highly recommended by a friend who'd gone through a nasty divorce. And within 5 minutes of sitting down in his office, I knew why. So, let me get this straight, Dan said, leaning back in his chair. Your wife cheated on you. Repeatedly. Brought her lover into your home. And now she's threatening to fight for custody? That's the gist of it, I said. Dan nodded slowly, tapping his pen against the edge of his desk. Do you have evidence? I pulled out my phone and slid it across the desk. Texts, emails, and a video of her lover hitting on someone else at a bar. It's all there. Dan picked up the phone and started scrolling through the folder I'd prepared. His eyebrows shot up a couple of times, and at one point he let out a low whistle. This is substantial, he said, finally looking up. The courts won't look kindly on her behavior, especially if you can prove that she was neglecting the kids to carry on this affair. Do you have anything that shows she was absent or unavailable for them? Not yet, I admitted, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's more to dig up. She's been distracted for months. Dan nodded again. All right, here's the plan. First, we file for divorce, citing infidelity as the cause. Then, we start building your case for custody. The goal is to show that you're the more stable parent, the one who puts the kids' well-being first. I leaned forward. And if she tries to smear me, to make me look like the bad guy, Dan smirked. Let her try. If she throws dirt, we'll throw evidence. The courts don't care about petty drama. They care about facts. And from what I've seen so far, the facts are on your side. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Before I left his office, Dan handed me a list of things to do. Gather more evidence, document every interaction with Jessica, and most importantly, stay calm. Don't give her anything she can use against you, he warned. No angry texts, no shouting matches. Keep it professional. Easier said than done, but I was determined to follow his advice. When I got back to the cabin that afternoon, the kids were playing outside by the lake. Max was skipping stones, and Lila was busy building what looked like a rock castle on the shore. For a moment, I just stood there, watching them. They looked so happy, so carefree, and I realized just how much I had to lose if this went wrong. Daddy, look! Lila shouted, holding up a perfectly round rock. It's a magic stone. I walked over and knelt beside her, taking the rock from her tiny hands. What makes it magic? She tilted her head, thinking hard. It makes wishes come true, she said finally. I smiled, ruffling her hair. Then I'd better keep it safe, huh? She nodded seriously, and I slipped the rock into my pocket. It wasn't magic, of course, but in that moment, I wished with everything I had that I could protect her and Max from what was coming. That evening, while the kids were asleep, Jessica called. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to answer. Finally, I picked up. What do you want, Jessica? I said, skipping the pleasantries. Eric, this has gone far enough, she said, her voice sharp. Dragging lawyers into this? Posting cryptic crap on Facebook? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? I shot back. You cheated on me, Jessica. You lied. You betrayed me. And now you're acting like I'm the problem? Do you even hear yourself? She let out an exasperated sigh. Oh, spare me the martyr act. You're not perfect, Eric. You think just because you work late and pay the bills that makes you a good husband? Newsflash. I was miserable. And if you weren't so blind, you would have seen that. Right? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Because the logical solution to being miserable is to sleep with a personal trainer and blow up your family. Her tone turned icy. You know what? Fine. If you want to play the victim, go ahead. But you're not taking my kids away from me. I'll fight you, Eric. And I'll win. Good luck with that, I said, my voice calm but firm. Because the moment this goes to court, the judge is going to see exactly what kind of mother you've been. There was a long pause on her end. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, almost dangerous. You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? I don't think, Jessica. I know. I hung up before she could say anything else. The next day, I started putting the rest of my plan into motion. First, I reached out to a private investigator. If there was more dirt on Jessica or Ryan, I wanted it. I wanted to know everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every secret. Next, I started gathering my own evidence. I went through old texts and emails, piecing together a timeline of her affair. I reached out to a couple of mutual friends, carefully feeling them out to see if they'd noticed anything unusual. Most of them were shocked when I told them the truth. Some were supportive. Others, not so much. Jessica was already starting to spin her web. I'd seen a post on her Instagram that morning, a smiling selfie with the caption, "Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones you never expected to fight, but I'm stronger than they think." It made me sick, but I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story. Not this time. The war had begun, and I wasn't planning to lose. The days that followed were a mix of calm and chaos. On the surface, everything was peaceful. Max and Lila were happy, adjusting to life at the cabin, spending their days swimming in the lake or playing hide and seek in the woods. I did my best to shield them from the storm brewing behind the scenes. But underneath, the war with Jessica was escalating. Her social media posts became increasingly pointed. She didn't name me outright, but the message was clear to anyone who knew us. Pictures of her with the kids from months ago would pop up with captions like, "A mother's love never wavers, no matter how hard others try to break her spirit." She was playing the victim, carefully crafting a narrative to make herself look like the doting, devoted mother while subtly painting me as the villain. But I wasn't sitting idle. The private investigator I hired, let's call him Mike, was good. Very good. Within 3 days, he had a detailed report on Ryan Carter that read like a soap opera script. It turned out Ryan wasn't just a personal trainer. He was a personal disaster. First, there were his finances. He was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, unpaid loans, even a pending eviction notice for his apartment. Then there were the women. Mike uncovered at least 4 other women Ryan had been seeing while he was with Jessica, each one oblivious to the others. But the real kicker? Ryan had a record. Nothing major, just a couple of arrests for drunk and disorderly conduct, but enough to paint a clear picture of who he really was. Mike had even managed to get surveillance photos of Ryan meeting one of his other girlfriends at a bar. The timestamp on the photos? 2 days after I'd walked out of my house. I stared at the report for a long time, the anger simmering just below the surface. Jessica had risked everything. Our marriage, our family. For this guy, a walking, talking red flag factory. But the anger didn't consume me. If anything, it sharpened my focus. I wasn't just going to expose Jessica. I was going to make her regret every single lie she had told. Later that week, I set up a meeting with Dan, my lawyer, to go over the next steps. I handed him the report from Mike, along with copies of Jessica's texts and emails. Dan flipped through the pages, nodding as he read. "This is gold," he said, smirking. "Ryan's financial issues, the other women, his arrests. It all adds up to one thing: poor judgment on Jessica's part. The court's not going to look kindly on her bringing someone like this into her kids' lives." "What's our next move?" I asked. "We file," Dan said firmly. "We're going for primary custody, with supervised visitation for her until we can prove she's stable. Based on what you've given me, we have a very strong case." "And if she fights back?" Dan smiled, a sharp, wolfish grin. "Let her. She's fighting uphill and she knows it. She might try to play dirty, but you've got the facts on your side. Facts always win. Jessica didn't take the news well. When she was served with the divorce papers, she called me immediately, her voice a mix of anger and panic. "Are you serious, Eric?" she snapped. "You're actually doing this?" "Dead serious," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This is what happens when you destroy a family, Jessica. Actions have consequences." "Oh, spare me the lecture," she hissed. "You think you're so righteous, so perfect. But I've got news for you. You're not. And if you think I'm just going to roll over and let you take my kids, you're delusional. They're not just your kids," I shot back. "And I'm not trying to take them from you. I'm trying to protect them. From your lies, your selfishness, and from that loser you've been sneaking around with." "Ryan isn't a loser," she spat. "You don't know him." "Oh, I know plenty," I said, my voice sharp. "Like the fact that he's drowning in debt. Or that he's juggling multiple women, just like he juggles his unpaid bills. Or how about his little record? You didn't know about that, did you?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. I could almost hear her brain scrambling to catch up, to process the reality I just dropped on her. "Don't believe everything you hear," she said finally, but her voice lacked the confidence it usually carried. "Oh, I don't believe everything," I said. "Just the stuff backed up by photos, court records, and eyewitness accounts. Face it, Jessica, you gambled and you lost." She didn't reply. Instead, she hung up on me. But Jessica wasn't done. I knew her too well to think she'd go down quietly. And sure enough, the next day she made her move. It started with an email. A long, rambling message accusing me of being an absent father who never put the family first. She claimed I was only filing for custody to punish her and insisted that the kids would be better off with her. But that wasn't the worst part. A few hours later, I got a call from Kelly. "Eric," she said, her voice tense, "you need to see this." She sent me a screenshot of a post Jessica had made in a local moms group on Facebook. The post read, "I'm going through a really tough time right now. My husband is trying to take my kids away from me, using lies and manipulation to make me look like the bad guy. If anyone knows a good family lawyer, please DM me. I just want to protect my babies." The comments were exactly what you'd expect. A flood of sympathy from strangers who had no idea what the truth was. People calling me a monster, telling Jessica to stay strong, offering advice and support. It was infuriating, but I didn't take the bait. Instead, I sent the screenshot to Dan. "Perfect," he said when I called him. "The more she tries to play the victim, the more obvious it'll be to the court that she's grasping at straws. Just stick to the plan, Eric. Let her dig her own grave." That night, as I tucked Max and Lila into bed, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. Lila clung to her stuffed unicorn, her eyes already half closed, while Max whispered, "Dad, are we going to stay here forever?" I knelt beside his bed, brushing the hair out of his eyes. "I don't know, buddy," I said honestly. "But no matter what happens, I'm going to make sure you and your sister are safe. I promise." As I sat in the dark living room later that night, I realized something. This wasn't just about beating Jessica anymore. It wasn't about revenge or anger or even justice. It was about them. Max and Lila deserved better than the mess Jessica had created. They deserved stability, love, and a future free from lies. And I was going to give it to them, even if it meant burning everything else to the ground. The fight wasn't over, but I wasn't backing down. Jessica wasn't just a liar. She was a strategist, a manipulative, calculating opportunist who knew how to make herself look like the hero in her own twisted story. And when people like her feel cornered, they don't surrender. They escalate. 2 days after her pity post in the moms group, I got an email from her lawyer. Apparently, she wasn't just going to defend herself in court. She was filing for full custody. Full custody. The audacity of it was almost funny. Almost. Her claim that I was emotionally neglectful, controlling, and unfit to provide a stable environment for the children. She even threw in a line about how my sudden decision to remove the kids from their home, without consulting her, showed a pattern of irrational and impulsive behavior. I sat there in the cabin's living room, staring at the email. My jaw tightened, my hands curling into fists. She was twisting everything. My escape with the kids, my fight to protect them. She was spinning it into a narrative where I was the villain. My first instinct was to call her and let her have it. To scream at her for turning this into a circus. For dragging the kids into her mess. But then I remembered what Dan had told me. Don't give her anything she can use against you. So I didn't call her. I called Dan. Expected this, he said, his voice calm, almost casual. When people like Jessica feel cornered, they hit hard. They try to distract from their own behavior by putting the other person on trial. What do we do? I asked. We fight fire with facts, Dan replied. We show the court exactly who she is, exactly what she's done, and exactly why the kids are better off with you. I'll draft the response, but I need you to stay focused, Eric. Don't let her get into your head. He was right. This wasn't about me or my pride. This was about Max and Lila. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and preparation. Dan filed the divorce papers and our petition for primary custody, attaching every shred of evidence we had. Texts, emails, the private investigator's report, everything. Meanwhile, Jessica continued her campaign. She sent messages to mutual friends, painting me as a vindictive husband who was using the kids as pawns. She even had the nerve to show up at the cabin unannounced one afternoon, pounding on the door like a lunatic. Eric, open the door, she shouted, her voice muffled through the wood. The kids were inside, sitting at the kitchen table working on a puzzle. I told them to stay put and went to the door, cracking it open just enough to see her face. What do you want, Jessica? I asked, my voice flat. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild. She wasn't the composed, cunning woman I'd married. She looked frantic, desperate. You can't do this, she hissed. You can't just take them and hide here like some kind of coward. I didn't take them, I said calmly. They're my kids too. And I didn't hide, I protected them. From you. Her eyes narrowed. From me? That's rich, Eric. Do you really think you're some kind of hero? You've been checked out of this marriage for years. You think paying bills and showing up to soccer games makes you a good dad? You don't even know how to connect with them. I felt a flicker of anger, but I kept my voice steady. You're right. I wasn't perfect, but at least I didn't bring a stranger into our house. At least I didn't lie to them, to you, to myself. So spare me the lecture on parenting, Jessica. Her face twisted in rage. You're going to regret this. You think you're better than me? You think the court's going to hand you custody just because you've got some stupid emails? I'm their mother, Eric. No one's going to take them away from me. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so the kids wouldn't hear. This isn't about you, Jessica. It's about them. And if you really cared about them, you'd stop dragging them into your mess. For a moment, she just stared at me, her chest heaving. Then she turned and stormed off, her heels clicking against the porch. I watched her get into her car and drive away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't feel victorious. I felt drained. That night, I sat down with Max and Lila. It wasn't a conversation I wanted to have, but it was one I couldn't avoid any longer. Hey guys, I said, sitting on the floor with them as they worked on their puzzle. Can we talk for a minute? Max looked up, his brow furrowed. Are we in trouble? No, buddy, I said quickly. You're not in trouble. I need to talk to you about Mommy. Lila's eyes widened. Is Mommy coming here? No, I said gently. Not right now, but things are going to be different for a while. Max frowned. Because you and Mommy had a fight? I nodded slowly. Yeah, but it's more than that. Mommy and I aren't going to live together anymore. And I know that's hard to understand, but I want you to know that it's not your fault. It's not about you or Lila. We both love you very much, and that's never going to change. Max didn't say anything. He just looked down at the puzzle, his little hands clenching into fists. Lila, on the other hand, crawled into my lap, her unicorn tucked under her arm. Will we still see Mommy? She asked softly. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. Yes, but it might not be as often. We're still figuring everything out, and I promise I'll keep you both safe no matter what. She seemed to accept that, but Max was still silent. Finally, he looked up at me. His eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in him before. Not anger, not sadness, something deeper. Did Mommy do something bad? He asked quietly. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. How do you answer that without breaking their world? She made some mistakes, I said carefully. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. People make mistakes sometimes, even grown-ups. Max didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. The next morning, I got an unexpected text from Kelly. Kelly, you need to see this. Jessica's unraveling. Attached was a screenshot of Jessica's latest post in the moms group. Divorce is the hardest thing a mother can go through, especially when your ex is trying to turn your own children against you. Stay strong, mamas. Never let anyone take away your babies. Below the post were dozens of comments from women offering support, calling me a manipulative narcissist and a terrible father. Jessica was good. She knew how to work people, how to pull at their heartstrings. But the cracks were starting to show. Kelly's message came through a second later. Kelly, she's losing control. Keep going. You've got this. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger or exhaustion. I felt hope. Jessica's web of lies was starting to collapse. And when it did, I'd be ready to pick up the pieces. For Max, for Lila, and for me. The courtroom smelled like stale coffee and old wood polish, but the tension in the air was electric. Jessica sat across from me, dressed in a tailored blazer and a look of forced serenity. She was trying to play the role of the wronged mother, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her lips pressed into a practiced frown. I, on the other hand, was done pretending. This was it, the moment everything came to light. Dan leaned over and whispered, "Remember, stay calm. Let her dig her own grave. We've got this." I nodded, keeping my eyes locked on the judge as she entered and called the room to order. Jessica's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman with a piercing voice, wasted no time launching into a carefully crafted narrative. "Your Honor," she began, "my client is a dedicated mother who has been blindsided by her husband's erratic behavior. He removed the children from their home without her consent and has since been using aggressive tactics to alienate her from them. This is a clear case of parental manipulation." Jessica sat there, nodding solemnly, as if every word was gospel. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from reacting. This was part of the game, painting me as the villain, distracting the court from her own actions. But Dan had prepared me for this. When it was his turn, Dan stood, his calm confidence filling the room. "Your Honor," he said, "what my client seeks today is not vengeance or retaliation, but stability for his children. The evidence we've submitted will show that Mrs. Green's actions have repeatedly jeopardized the emotional and physical well-being of the children. This is not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of fact." He placed a thick folder of evidence on the judge's desk. And then it began. Over the next 2 hours, Dan systematically dismantled Jessica's facade. First came the texts and emails. Dan projected them onto a screen for the whole courtroom to see. Conversations between Jessica and Ryan that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Flirty messages. Plans to meet while I was at work. One particularly damning message where she bragged about how Eric would never find out. Jessica's lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved her off. Next came the private investigator's report. Dan walked the court through every detail: Ryan's debt, his other relationships, his arrests. He even presented the photos of Ryan at the bar with another woman, time-stamped and dated. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her confident demeanor starting to crack. But the real blow came when Dan introduced the witness statements. 2 of our mutual friends had agreed to testify, both of them confirming that Jessica had been absent and distracted for months, often leaving the kids with babysitters or me while she worked late. One of the friends, a mother from Max's soccer team, had even witnessed Jessica and Ryan together in a parking lot, holding hands. By the time Dan finished, Jessica's lawyer looked like she'd aged 10 years. When it was Jessica's turn to speak, she stood, her hands trembling slightly. "Your Honor," she began, her voice wavering, "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, but that doesn't make me a bad mother. Everything I've done has been out of love for my children. Eric, he's painting me as a monster, but he's no saint. He's cold, distant, and emotionally unavailable. I felt invisible in my own marriage." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she made her fatal mistake. And as for Ryan, she continued, her tone hardening, he's not the person Eric is making him out to be. Yes, we're friends, but that's all we are. Eric is twisting things to hurt me, and it's not fair. Dan didn't even flinch. He stood, holding up a printed email. Your Honor, he said. This is a confirmation of a hotel reservation made by Mrs. Green under her name. The second guest? Ryan Carter. Date? 3 weeks ago. This is not friendship. This is deceit. Jessica's face went pale. Her lawyer buried her face in her hands. By the end of the hearing, it was clear to everyone in the room where the truth lay. The judge didn't even need to deliberate for long. She ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of Max and Lila, with Jessica receiving supervised visitation until she could demonstrate that her life was stable. The divorce proceedings were still ongoing, but this victory felt monumental. As the judge gave her ruling, Jessica sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. When the hearing ended, she stormed out of the courtroom without a word to me. Later that evening, I sat on the cabin porch, watching the kids chase fireflies in the yard. Max was laughing, his arms flailing as he tried to catch one, while Lila twirled in circles with her unicorn clutched to her chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. Jessica would still be a part of their lives, that was inevitable. But the control she had once wielded was gone. Her lies, her manipulation, her selfishness. It had all crumbled under the weight of her own choices. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Kelly. Kelly, saw the ruling. I'm happy for you, Eric. You deserved this. I stared at the message for a moment before typing a reply. Me, thanks. The kids deserved it more. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I stood by the lake, looking out over the calm, glassy water. I thought about everything that had happened, everything I'd lost, and everything I'd gained. This wasn't the life I had envisioned when I married Jessica. I never thought I'd be here, raising 2 kids on my own, rebuilding from the ground up. But in a way, I felt free. Jessica's betrayal had broken me, but it had also forced me to become something stronger. A better father, a better man. As I stood there, I reached into my pocket and pulled out Lila's magic stone. I held it in my palm, feeling its cool surface against my skin. I made a wish, not for revenge, not for justice, but for peace. For Max and Lila to grow up happy and safe. For the strength to keep moving forward no matter what. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like that wish might actually come true. The war was over, and I had won.